Welcome to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. I am David Haugh from the Mully & Haugh Show on 6-7 The Score. Dan Wiederer is from the Chicago Tribune. Thank you to Herb Howard for filling in last week. Had a terrific Senior Bowl week, so I'm sure that he had a good workout. I think that his evaluation, for what I could tell, scouts were very high on a Herb Howard, Dan. So, yeah, good episode.
Yeah, he's going to be part of the Take the North family when we need a pinch hitter here and there. It was nice to talk ball with him. Obviously, talk a lot about Patrick Mahomes and things leading up to the Super Bowl. I can't believe we're here. Episode 51, and we're approaching a Super Bowl that's very intriguing, David, in a lot of ways. And I'm on the verge of a full prediction flip-flop here after initially going all in with the Eagles. I'm about 2 steps from flipping it and going Chiefs.
Wow, that was easy. So you can listen to the Take the North pod, as I said, anywhere you get your podcast or the free Odyssey app. You can watch us on the 670 The Scores YouTube page or the Odyssey YouTube page. And we are in the midst of Super Bowl week. A lot of things going on in Arizona, a lot of Bears connections and things also going on off the field for the Bears. We're just going to run through a lot of little connections, Dan, because as much as the Eagles and the Chiefs are fixated on obviously deciding who's going to be the champion this year, 30 other teams are trying to work toward next season and filling out staffs, beginning the scouting process, and there's a lot going on. I think let's begin with what I feel like as we tape this podcast this morning, that Matt Nagy's presence at the Super Bowl created a little bit of interest, piqued the curiosity of some Chicago reporters who were in Arizona covering the Super Bowl. Thought it was very interesting what Matt Nagy had to say in terms of the lessons learned during his head coaching tenure with the Bears. Also, he was a likable guy, Dan, and when he talked candidly about learning from his failure and he's talking about failing, you felt for him a little bit, and that was very I don't think it was very surprising, but it just shows you that it's one of those things that he's landed on his feet with Kansas City. He's in the Super Bowl, but still a very, I don't want to say painful period to reflect on, but he looks back with some regret.
Well, first of all, as you well know, having covered Super Bowl, the best part of the week is the mandatory availability, where every coach and every player of both teams are basically available to you for an hour if you need them on 3 different days. And obviously Monday was the big festivities, the circus, if you will, of media availability at the Super Bowl. But it gives an opportunity for those in the Chicago media who are down there to just walk up to Matt Nagy and really, for the first time since his firing a year plus ago, have the chance to go deeper, to get a layer down, a second layer down, and just kind of get his reflections, his sentiments, his thoughts. I mean, I do think that Matt is sincere when he talks about the lessons he learned and things he wishes he had done different here. I've also been very consistent in echoing that the final season that Matt was here, the setup was not ideal. And I've said as much that the organizational health wasn't at a point where they could put together a plan that made sense long term. It was all grasping at the now. And so that's why you wind up signing Andy Dalton in free agency. It's why you wind up drafting Justin Fields, obviously a month after signing Andy Dalton, and then having a different developmental plan for him because you felt like you were in a win or else situation, which you were in, and you didn't win, and you got the or else, right? And the or else happened to be a firing. It happened to be for Matt Nagy, a trip to South Africa with his wife after leaving Hallis Hall. And then now it's a trip in the Super Bowl working every single day with Patrick Mahomes again.
That was a fascinating detail in Patrick Finley's story in Suntimes.com. I know he was holding court with everybody, but just the reality of coming to this realization of you wanted to work again and processing through the previous 4 years on a safari in South Africa with your wife, when really you wanted to be anywhere but there, frankly, and he didn't want to be an unemployed head coach. But I think that was one of the things. And Matt Nagy, for all of his issues in terms of not being able to really, it's odd, Dan, I always felt like he's a likable guy. He's one of these guys that you could really envision having a beer with. And really one of the things he struggled with mightily in Chicago was communication. and he never really spoke with a lot of clarity. A lot of people like to point out the fact that a lot of his messages were garbled and kind of lost in translation. And when we played the audio, part of the audio on the morning show, on the Mully and Haugh show, I warned people or apologized for if they swerved off the road because they were triggered by hearing Matt Nagy's voice again. That's the kind of effect sometimes he had on Bears fans. And yet I think the people that covered him, you could speak to this better than I could, probably being around him more often. He was a likable guy.
Yeah, I respected the way Matt handled himself. I think we all know that his inability to get that offense unlocked and back on track for an extended period of time is the reason he's no longer here and the reason the Bears went in a different direction. But personally, I felt he was, a good leader in certain ways. And then there are things that come with being the head coach / CEO of an NFL team that are a little eye-opening. And I did think it was reflective of Matt in Arizona to talk about the way he sees Andy Reid do the job differently this time around than he did when he was under him as an assistant, where you're just kind of in your own world and not considering all the big picture ramifications of everything you do at the top. And so, who knows? A lot of times in this league, guys don't get second chances. Some guys get second, third, fourth chances to roll through things. So we don't know what Matt Nagy's future holds. I do think that, he will be in the league for a long time and a prominent role, and we'll see which way his ladder takes him. But certainly he was there. And then, certainly he was also very praiseful of Justin Fields and the belief after 1 year spending time with Justin Fields, having the sense that the preparation habits, the passion, all those sort of leadership intangibles that you look for in a compelling franchise quarterback are there with Justin. So it was interesting to hear that a year later where Matt was on that. And
that came up with Mark Carman, I think, of CHGO, approached Matt and asked him about the decision to start him against the Browns, a game everybody wishes they could forget, and also just to get his impressions on Justin Fields in year 2.
Justin part of it. Do you almost sort of regret putting him out there in week 3 when you look back at it?
Well, so that situation, again, there's so many things that can go on. Take care. Andy got hurt, and we had a plan through this whole thing. Everybody said, hey, you're trying to do the Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes deal. Right. They're all different. And we wanted to make sure that we handled Justin. We knew that was our future. Right. And we wanted to handle him and do everything we possibly could to make sure that he succeeded. Scheme, how we handle practices, everything. And it's just that was a unique situation with our quarterback room. They were all great. They handled it great. But, it just didn't go the way we wanted it to. And, again, you just learn from it.
Yeah. I just look back at it I just thought maybe if you were under pressure, I got to develop this guy and my job's on the line. But maybe in retrospect, maybe we weren't ready to put him out there and he wasn't ready to do it.
Again, these guys are so young, and when they're thrown into it, everybody thinks that it could just happen overnight. Right. They're going to play like they did in college. That's not real. Yeah. And so when you're a coach and you go through your offense, your scheme, your players, you want to do everything you possibly can to make it easy for them to succeed, whatever that is. And we learn too as coaches. Yes. And so, you go back to the Cleveland Browns game, right? It was a really, really difficult game. I think there was 8 or 9 sacks and it's not what we wanted for Justin, right? We didn't want it for us. We didn't want it for Justin. The last thing you want is to hurt somebody's confidence, a young quarterback like we did that game. Yeah. No one wants that, for anybody. And so we needed to learn from that and be able to change some things in how we handled him. But you end up running out of time, and you also know that schematically, it was a different situation.
Schematically, you might want to try to block Myles Garrett. That might have been schematically what you wanted to do. We all remember that afternoon. I love Carm. I love the fact that he asked Matt Nagy about the Browns' scheme and game plan all this time later.
Yeah.
And that brought back some real unpleasant memories for Bears fans.
Honestly, David, there's so much within that soundbite that's worth talking about. And I do think it's funny that Matt's here in a very exciting week at the Super Bowl, trying to go get a ring with the Chiefs. And now he's all of a sudden he's putting the time machine and he's back in week 3 of the season that cost him his job in Chicago. And it's just, it's funny to kind of, he was open about it. He didn't bristle about it. The one thing I would take exception to what he said there is that he regretted putting Justin in a situation where he lost some confidence. I don't think Justin lost any confidence. And I think one of the most telling things in Justin's early development was the way he came back the following week. I'm pretty sure they beat the Lions the very next game. And it was a sign of mental fortitude and resilience that wasn't there in Justin's predecessor. That was sort of refreshing and reassuring. Like, oh man, this dude just got his brains beat in. And 1 week later, he wasn't seeing ghosts. He wasn't freaking out. He was sturdy enough and mature enough emotionally to just get on to the next thing. And that's one of the gifts that Justin has that's potentially going to make him an engine of championship runs.
He might have lost confidence in the coaching staff.
Maybe, yeah.
Because after executing a game plan where you are exposed to the extent that Justin Fields was exposed in that start against the Browns, I could see that happening more than I could see probably questioning yourself, because from his standpoint, he's a first-round draft pick. He's always had success. He's going into the game for the first time. He's facing this kind of challenge, very confident in his own abilities. My goodness, nobody's blocking the rush end. So I would think very naturally you could see Justin Fields coming out of that, not necessarily doubting himself as much as what has he got himself into here in Chicago. Because that would be the thing that I would question the most out of that experience.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And some of the flashbacks that make you kind of shudder a little bit. It's just the entirety of how 2021 was set up and unfolded. And we really knew it in January that they were potentially going down a path where they were trying to do two things at once. They were trying to turn the page while also holding on to these dwindling hopes that they were a legitimate championship contender. And they were trying to straddle that fence. And David, you know what happens when you try to straddle a fence? It ends up pretty painful, right? Like it's not the thing you want to do. And
you don't want to do that.
I mean, and that's what it was, right? It was coming out of this mirage playoff season in 2020 in the pandemic year, being exposed in the playoff game against the Saints for who you really were, but then trying to be like, oh, but what if we just hold on a little longer while also trying to draft a quarterback, develop them, and not have a real clear-cut plan in a direction. And that's the reason I bring that up now, David, is because it ties back into everything we've been talking about for the past month in terms of top-down organizational oversight and leadership that allows you to not fall into those traps, that has, sets a clear path. And so Kevin Warren's hiring as a president last month is something I think gives you a little bit more confidence that you won't get caught in one of these zones trying to do too many things at once and ultimately making mistakes that everyone saw in advance were going to be mistakes, and then having to pay for the mistakes, and then having to start over and then reboot and rebuild and lose and then celebrate a number one pick. And here we are.
Last thing about Matt Nagy before we move on, because we have a lot of other stuff to get to. Question for you.
Yeah.
Who do you think has a better chance of becoming a head coach first? Matt Nagy, who could have a Super Bowl ring on his finger after being on a Super Bowl winning staff, with a winning record at his first and only tenure as an NFL head coach, or Luke Getsy, offensive coordinator of a 14-loss team, who might be presiding over the emergence of somebody who could be a Pro Bowl caliber franchise quarterback in Justin Fields.
Remind me how you phrased that question so I can answer it specifically. Who's got the better chance to do it first?
Who's got the better chance of becoming a NFL head coach quickest?
I say Getsy, because I think Getsy holds the keys to one of the league's most intriguing players. And if he can get it unlocked, and if he can push Justin toward a developmental springboard that turns the Bears into a legitimate team again, all of a sudden that stock will rise, and you will not only have a guy who has taken this young raw talent and turned him into something, you'll be striking while the iron's hot. I mean, obviously we know Matt got the Andy Reid shine helped them get the Bears job, but that was before Patrick Mahomes was even starting there. And so it remains to be seen just how much he can do and has done to turn a quarterback into a difference maker in this league. And so I think Luke's opportunity is better at this point because Patrick obviously is established. We know who he is, and we know that the credit largely belongs in Andy's lap.
I don't disagree with that. And yet I find that and it's not mildly surprising, but it just underscores how much you have to take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself. Matt Nagy left Chicago after, in his words, having failed, and yet he had a winning record, correct? I mean, he won more games than he lost as the Bears head coach.
So I got a trivia question from someone who will not be named right now, but via text asking who would have the better tenure as a coach in Chicago, Matt Nagy or Matt Eberflus. And if you're setting Vegas odds on that, you say Matt Nagy because Matt Nagy had a record above 500, and it's going to be a steep climb for Matt Eberflus to coach his next game with a career record as a head coach above 500. That's a long haul to get back to.
And if you get to the Super Bowl in year 3, nobody's going to care about what your overall record is. They're just
no doubt
care about who you're playing and how much you're going to pay Justin Fields to keep him in Chicago.
Have you projected a Super Bowl in year 3? Is that where we're at? Okay,
no,
okay,
that's not where we're at.
Okay,
no.
Okay. Just wanted to get this.
This is taking the North, but they're still climbing it. All right, so we're not exactly there yet. Let's stick with some staff news and some assistant coach developments. Let's go with the Bears first before we move on to the division. Obviously, I don't think we've talked since they hired John Haugh, a veteran, to the staff. He will be in charge of cornerbacks, I believe, passing game coordinator, a lot of different titles. Bottom line is, knowing John Haugh as I do, being familiar with his work, they're hiring him to stabilize a staff, to give some more veteran, input and experience, because they've got, to me, the secondary could be potentially the strength of this team. You get somebody that is as well-traveled as John Haugh, as experienced as he is. To me, this was a very good move for a staff that defensively, I mean, obviously the results need improvement, but the staff, I think, overall acquitted itself pretty well as a group.
So I'm certainly interested in picking your brain on this topic and hearing more thoughts on it. John was with the Bears for my first season on the beat. He was a holdover from the Lovie regime in Trestman's first season. And so I got to know him a little bit, but you know him really well. And he's inheriting a secondary here with 3 young players in Gordon Brisker and Jalen Johnson that you hope become cornerstones of what you're trying to build in Chicago. And so if you can get your fingerprints on those guys and turn them into something, now all of a sudden you get that defense humming in the right direction, and you can speak to John's ability to connect and on a very personal level to develop.
Well, sure. As a coach, obviously he was here between 2009 and 2014, and the players that went through Haugh at that time all pretty much said the same thing about John Haugh: demanding, yes, smart, always put them in a good position to succeed, fundamentally sound, and really somebody who a stickler for details. So that's their version of playing for John Haugh. Now, on a personal level, you're right. I am a little admittedly biased. I have a connection with John Haugh. We both are former Ball State defensive backs. I know his family. His brother, Brady Haugh, was the head coach at Ball State. He preceded me at Ball State. I know that the connection between Brady Haugh and Matt Eberflus, who were on the same staff at Toledo way back in the day, helped facilitate John Haugh returning to Halas Hall because of that connection, because of that trust, if you will. It's all about relationships. Always is in any industry. But I can tell you that John Haugh is as level-headed and really as good of a guy as you're going to have in the building at Halas. And I think the young players are really going to benefit from his experience, and the fellow coaches are going to benefit just from his expertise. So I think, he also was a former Bear. In 1980, he was a player. He briefly was on the taxi squad, or he might have played in a game or two. Not a long career, but I got into coaching after that. So this is actually his 3rd stint representing the Bears organization.
These are little moments, right, that help boost a football team up. And I recall, we can say all we want about Ed Donatello as a defensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings and his search for work after losing out on that job. But when he arrived here as a secondary coach, there was a profound respect immediately amongst the players in that room. And there were young players like Kyle Fuller trying to have a career resurgence. There was Eddie Jackson in there. And these guys fed into the teaching, and they fed into the ability on a daily basis to get better. And all of a sudden you saw some of the takeoff. And so if you can get a number of these different sort of staff moves or things that just do a little bit to catalyze things, all of a sudden you shorten your road back. And as we've documented for months and months on this podcast, the road back is a long one.
Well, I have a ton of confidence in the Bears secondary to take that step now, even more so because I already like the talent. And now I know they're going to be coached in a way that they will. And I was a big fan. I think we both respected Alan Williams and the approach he took overall as a defensive coordinator. You get more talent up front.
Yeah.
Secondary could be set. And this could be, this is a good move. It's only an assistant coach. But you're right. These little moves do tend to make a big impact if you make enough of the right ones.
No question. And you look like there was a handful of staff changes. I think they brought on Omar Young, assistant quarterbacks coach, had some strength and conditioning shifts around, and other offensive quality control coach in. So just some minor mechanics inside the building that they're tweaking, and we'll get a little bit more insight into those as they get back on the football field in the spring. And
we like to keep those Ball State alums employed, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's hiring them nowadays. And so
that's right.
good for the Bears for taking that on.
You mentioned Ed Donatel. He is the former Viking defensive coordinator, the person they hired to replace him. The Vikings, I think, hit a home run, Dan. This, to me, I said this on the morning show, and I don't take it back. I think in hiring Brian Flores, this might be the most significant staff addition or new coach entering the division in this offseason. He pulled himself out of the finalist contention for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job. Maybe he knew he wasn't going to get it, but I think that he made this move before he knew what was going to happen in Arizona, and I think he sees opportunity. The Vikings have the weapons on offense. The Vikings, if they're as aggressive and if they are reflective of the kind of coach that we know Brian Flores can be, this is a very interesting move in Minneapolis. And I think it's not great news for the Bears because every defense is now going to be geared to stop in part Justin Fields as he continues to emerge. This is a great move for the Vikings.
Well, and the Vikings need a little bit of a talent infusion on that defense as well. It wasn't all at Donatel for the struggles that they had that ultimately bounced them from the playoffs early in a disappointing loss. But you're going to get a guy in there that is a stickler for detail, a guy who breathes a fire every single day that he coaches. And Brian Flores could unite with Kevin O'Connell on the offensive side of the ball and really do some things that make things sustainable for the Vikings. We talk all the time about this, the wanting to avoid the flash and then the dive, which the Bears have been masters at for 30 years. And I think there's a perception around the league that this was pretty flimsy, that the Vikings weren't a 13-win team, that they're not going to be a factor in 2023 or beyond. And I just would like to see, because I think they played some winning football in 2022, and they have some things to build on. They obviously have one of the best talents in the game in Justin Jefferson on offense, and now you add to your defense in a way that seems significant with Brian Flores coming in, who has gotten results quickly in previous stops, and you see what's there for it. This is going to be a transition year in the division in a lot of different ways for all four teams, and it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see where each one of these four teams in the North take their transition and which way they ultimately come out when we get to this point a year from now.
It'll be Brian Flores devising game plans to stop Luke Getsy in his game plan every week that they play. That's the matchup that I look forward to. Dan, Luke Getsy coming off a Senior Bowl experience in Mobile, Alabama as the head coach. His team lost 27-10, but what an experience it was for him to get an up close and personal observation opportunity for some of these prospects who represent kind of the rank and file of the NFL draft. These are seniors. These are guys who aren't necessarily, surefire first rounders, but they're guys who may, be the second and third day picks. These are guys that when you go into a room on draft day 2 or day 3, it's great to have somebody like Getsy being able to tell you what John Michael Schmitz looks like at the center from Minnesota, or maybe the wide receiver Jitterbug from Houston, or whatever the case may be, the edge rusher from Auburn. These are valuable insights that he can offer now that he had a firsthand experience over the course of a week.
Yeah, I never like to overstate it because it's all going to come to play in the draft room in April. But I think there is a level of insight that you get when you're hands-on. And I think Luke will have an ability to communicate in those rooms about how player X handled meetings, about, hey, let's steer away from player Y because his ability to pick up concepts felt a little slow to me. And we weren't able to really connect in the communication standpoint that you want to. You gain an insight into how guys are behind closed doors when they're not just running drills out there, and how they interact with teammates in meetings. And it's very small, and it's a 1 week sort of sample size in a different kind of environment. But there are things that you can at least add to the discussion when you're finalizing that draft board in April, when you've got Ryan Poles and his staff working through some things and saying, hey, where do we draw the line for this cloud, and who do we want to push up or down? And Luke can say, well, listen, like my 4 days in mobile with this dude were awesome, and I would love to have him, so let's bump him up a peg. We'll see where it goes. And I think for Luke in general, I just think it's a great experience to have that opportunity for the question you asked earlier, to lead and to understand what that's like at the top. Again, it's a small week with a lot of unfamiliar pieces around you in an unfamiliar setting, but it gives you a taste of the experience.
He might have met somebody during the week or had a moment with somebody that he's interviewing with next off season. And that's going to be an invaluable kind of icebreaker. And, these are little things that may come up, but we have enough examples to point to that this kind of networking opportunity is something that you want to take advantage of. And as far as, the evaluation phase, you're right. Sometimes that can get overstated, but I also think that it will help us understand better if the Bears trade down and they get an additional second-round draft pick, and they use it on the center from Minnesota. We'll know why. Maybe it's because Luke Getsy was pounding his fist on the table saying, we got to have that guy because I got to know him during that week in Mobile, and he's somebody you want in your building.
Yeah, and then they'll tell us why, and we'll be able to ask, the scouts and then Luke himself on where they went. I do always point out, as at my level of caution, is that the entire Bears coaching staff went down to the Senior Bowl to coach in 2017, and they came back with Jordan Morgan as the only player from the Senior Bowl that they drafted. It was a day 3 guard who never played a game in the organization. Meanwhile, in their meeting rooms that week, they had Cooper Kupp and Hassan Reddick, and somehow didn't find a way to make those guys Bears, and so just caution, just a little caution, little fine print, little fine print.
That's a huge buzzkill. That is the fine print. That's the Surgeon General warning. Oh my gosh. I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and also don't forget that Senior Bowl, there was a surprise pop-in from Dabo Swinney, who was down there watching some of his Clemson guys and issued that whole proclamation that Deshaun Watson is the next Michael Jordan, and anyone that passes on him is going to regret it. And again, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of that again, but hey, you never know what you find out at the Senior Bowl.
You never know what you find out at the Senior Bowl. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Well played. All right, everything this offseason, though, is about, we can agree on this, what to expect from Ryan Poles, the evaluation of Ryan Poles' ability to evaluate. And I think that in trying to get to know more about what to expect, it's fun to talk to as many people as possible who might know him or might have some insight. Obviously, with the Chiefs at the Super Bowl, there's a lot of people there that would offer opinions on Ryan Poles. I talked to somebody who is an unlikely source, Dan, about Ryan Poles, who spent the day with him in Chicago at Haugh Hall last May. Brian Cashman, the Yankees general manager, was a guest on the Saturday baseball show that I do inside the clubhouse every Saturday, 9 to 11 with Bruce Levine. And Brian Cashman, 1998, was 31 years old, the second youngest general manager in MLB history. He's somebody who won a World Series in 2009. They are perennially in the mix. He is the general manager of the Yankees. My point being, this is no fly-by-night executive who just caught lightning in a bottle. This is somebody who's been around for a long time and, frankly, is not going to waste his time. He doesn't suffer fools necessarily. And so I asked him when we had him as a guest what his impression was of Ryan Poles last May when he came to town to spend the day with him when he was in town when the Yankees played the White Sox.
It's really vitally important for us to, we recognize we don't have everything figured out, and we love to collaborate with people within our industry, but outside our industry, whether it's colleges or pro sports. So had the opportunity. One of our staff members had a relationship with Ryan from his previous position. And so I was asked early on would I like to meet with him and with a few of my staff members. So, yeah, we went out and spent the entire day before a night game with the White Sox up there at their facility. And I was blown away by the person, by the intellect. And, we shared a lot of conversations about experiences and a lot of different things they use in training and what we do and data and how you incorporate it and how you go hiring people and got to tour their facility. And I would say if you're a Bears fan, you should believe that the future is extremely bright. They got a great one in the general manager that they currently have with Ryan. And I know they've met the former Big Ten commissioner is now their president. And, I certainly like what the Bears are doing. And I think there's nothing but a positive in their future. But it was a great experience for us with the Yankees to get to know them better and see the direction they're going. And the one thing I would say is he's not afraid. He's not afraid to make very difficult decisions. And that's a true sign of great leadership there.
Brian Cashman, the Yankees general manager, speaking about Ryan Poles, with whom he spent the day last May. Connections, a friend of a friend. That's what network is all about. Interesting stuff from the Yankees GM.
Connections and friend of a friend are what things are all about, but it's also the hunger to expand your knowledge base in unconventional ways. And I remember talking to Ryan about this in the spring of 2022 and just that thirst he had to look outside of football, to look at different organizations around sports that have done things the right way and to try to find ways to learn and pick the brains of people who have had high level success. And then Brian Cashman, that connection was obviously profound. And he's Brian, I remember talking about, hey, look, like we walked through how do you school yourself on how to be most productive in trades? What do you do in trade negotiations that help you in that regard? What do you do with your grade scales? Obviously, baseball and football, two totally different sports, but how can we maybe borrow some of this? And so there is an element here that it instills confidence in me. And it's the same reason that I feel more promising, I don't know if that's the right word, or more optimistic about Matt Eberflus as a head coach, because the level of preparation that goes into some of this stuff, I think it's impressive and it's admirable that they go through those lengths to try to consider everything, and to prepare themselves for everything. Before Ryan ever had his opportunity to interview for a general manager job, he realized, I'm going to start to be on this list. I'm going to start to be on this climb. I've got to start compiling binders. I got to start understanding what my own vision is. I can't just walk in and say, this is what we did in Kansas City. Well, maybe my vision is different. And so you sharpen your vision and you expand your vision through experience and you do it through learning. And this is an example of a learning experience that Ryan has taken in and applied and obviously was obviously impactful on both sides.
All right, let's get through a few other things before we wrap up here. Quick thoughts on a couple things I want to ask you about because we haven't talked in a while. Some Bears related, some Super Bowl related, and maybe we'll get to your crazy prediction next pod so we can spend more time in you explaining it because you can have a fuller explanation of why you are waffling to the extent you are, and maybe you'll waffle some more.
Yeah, no, it's a simple explanation. I'll just tease it like that. It's a simple explanation, and it's just yeah. We'll leave it for the next pod, but it's really easy to understand why this 180 occurred.
Okay, let's focus on this one. So Aaron Rodgers says during the Pro-Am that he won last weekend, and isn't it nice that Aaron Rodgers finally won something in February?
There's also been some skepticism on whether he came in with the proper handicap index. There's some rumbling that maybe Aaron was deflategating some stuff in the handicap.
Where do you think he ends up? Do you think it's going to be is it certain that he's going to be traded in your mind? And are the Raiders the most likely destination for Aaron Rodgers?
Well, I told you on the Mully and Haugh show a week ago that there's things you can count on. If you're into winter soap operas, you got All My Children, you got General Hospital, and you got Aaron Rodgers' offseason with the Pat McAfee show being the main portal to figure out what he's talking about in any given moment. I mean, obviously, I think the connections in Vegas, the one connection with Devontae Adams is the most obvious. The need for a quarterback there is pronounced. It's certainly been escalating buzz. It's just really fascinating to be in this state again where the Packers aren't showing their hand, understandably, and Rodgers is not feeling like he's in the loop as much as he, quote unquote, deserves to be in certain conversations. It's very interesting to hear that they're talking about me without me there. I can't believe they would do that. It's just a little throwaway. So, but it's fascinating, right? Because I think we all believe that there were things in 2022 that weren't great, but certainly weren't indicative of a career nosedive. And I think Aaron's got a lot of good football left in him. He's got to get in the right environment. He's got to get into an environment that will accept all of the diva tendencies that he has. Let's be honest. Like, that's a big ask for a building. And so you better be very, very confident that you're going to get the level of not only play, but connection from him that's necessary to make a run at the big prize.
Do the Texans hiring DeMeco Ryans or the Panthers hiring Frank Reich have any impact, do you think, on either team's desire to move up and draft first overall and make a trade with the Bears?
I think the desire was already super high, and so now it's all about the process, the evaluation process, and who likes which quarterback, and how, can you fall in love with two or three, as we've talked about previously, and where do you value them? And then that's all kind of team dependent, and it's going to be really interesting to see what the Bears can command on a trade. I don't think those hirings do anything to push that up. I think both those organizations are hell-bent on getting a quarterback in this cycle, and then we'll figure out which direction they take to get it.
The Chargers would save $14 million under the salary cap if they cut Keenan Allen. Would you be interested if they did?
I'm interested in any proven productive receiver that can help Justin Fields develop. Now it's all about price tag, and I think I'm a little bit leery of some of the things I heard out of the general manager's mouth in January about, hey, maybe our answers are in house, and there's that thought like, oh, okay, is that a subterfuge to hide your actual plans, or do you genuinely believe that this isn't the best year to go and strike on a wide receiver, and you're going to try to put things together with Mooney and Chase Claypool and the cast and Byron Pringle and whoever else is the Equanimous St. Brown that might be left at Hallis Hall? Man, like you got to get playmakers. You have to. And they left themselves void of playmakers in 2022. And we saw some of the corresponding results and the corresponding lack of production. You cannot afford in what is going to be an absolutely critical year of development and developmental evaluation for Justin Fields to leave him without playmakers. So if that's an option for you, go kick the tires on it and make it happen if it fits your price tag.
Does Tom Brady retiring and leaving the Buccaneers make it more or less likely that Mike Evans will be either wanting a trade or they will be moving on to save some money?
I asked a buddy of mine who is known for throwing every possible future Bear into my text thread at times to just continue to make a list of all the guys that we're putting on this quote unquote shopping shelf for the Bears. Every time something like this happens, there's this sentiment like, oh, the entire Bucs roster is now available. Just go down to Tampa and figure out what you want to select and buy it and purchase it. Yeah, it certainly makes it more likely that they go in a new direction and that they try to rebuild in a different way. But I don't know. We've had 35 receivers linked to the Bears here since November, and it's going to be fascinating what the batting average on those 35 receivers that people have photoshopped into Bears uniforms actually is. Somebody should just compile, maybe Studs can do this in his spare time because he's overflowing with it, just an image gallery of guys photoshopped into Bears jerseys that never become Bears, because that would be a fun revisiting exercise in June.
An ex-Bear, Robert Quinn, is at the Super Bowl with the Eagles. I heard him tell reporters on opening night at the Super Bowl he was still mad about being traded. Do you buy it? Because that trade, as much as it might have worked out for Robert Quinn because he's at the Super Bowl, didn't work out so well for the Eagles. And I think I heard one of our guests on the Mully and Haugh show, Philadelphia WIP reporter, referred to it as even disastrous.
I do buy it, David, because if you get to know Robert Quinn as a dude, you understand he's a real simple dude, and that like the disruption of family and life for him was more pronounced than the pursuit of a Super Bowl. Now, I guarantee you that he's loving this week, and he's going to enjoy strapping on a helmet on Sunday and going out on that big stage and potentially having a chance to kiss that shiny silver trophy at the end of the evening. But I do believe just knowing Robert the way I got to know him over 2 years, that his wiring is simpler than, he's more human than ring chasing athlete, if that makes sense. And so I do think he was jarred jarred by it and jostled by it and thought that he was going to be around here, win, lose, or draw. The Bears obviously, I think, made the most of that trade, and it's just part of this business.
Moving on from Quinn, created some cap space. The Bears have $92 million under the salary cap, more than any other team in the NFL. The salary cap did increase for every team, giving each team theoretically more money to spend or more cap space to use. Do you think that will affect how aggressive the Bears are in free agency, or maybe not aggressive, but how successful they are, since more teams will now have more ammunition?
Well, that's part of it, right? Is other teams now have more ammunition, and a lot of that ammunition goes towards keeping your own guys. And so a guy that you might have thought was going to get away into free agency, if you've got a little more cap space than you figured, you've got a chance to now lock him up before he ever gets to that free agency flea market. And so it may deplete the market of what the Bears thought they were going to be shopping. And now I think the biggest key, and this is what you hear from people around the league right now, is Ryan Poles retaining discipline in the month of March. Like, we're going to look back on this and say, just because you have it to spend doesn't mean you have to spend it. And so that's going to be a big thing for Ryan Poles, because you can save some of this. You can save some. You don't have to go do all these contracts in 2023. The free agency class may be better in 2024, and you may say, well, look, like this just doesn't fit our price tag, and just because we have it to spend doesn't mean we have to spend it. So let's just sit and be cool with it and save our resources for a later time for a player that fits better. And so that's where that discipline comes in, because it can be really tempting, and you can have that eagerness to want to cross things off your to-do list. We all have that, but if you do it haphazardly and recklessly, now you create more to-dos down the road. And one of the greatest flaws of Ryan Poles' predecessor was the need to constantly go address mistakes that he made previously. How many times were we introduced to a new free agent tight end at Haugh and said, well, wait a second, Trey Burton's only here because Deion Sims was no good, and right. Like, you just kept going through, and Adam Shaheen was no good. So we get, don't put yourself in a position to have to go correct your mistakes long term. Make smart decisions and understand that just because you have it to spend, it should not inflate the board that you have inside your war room up there at Haugh in terms of what guys are actually worth in the 2023 NFL.
Last thing I have is this could be a very big week for the Bears in terms of their special teams legacy. We're going to find out Thursday night if Devin Hester is enshrined in this year's class that goes into Canton. Also, it would be cool to have this happen this year specifically because Dave Tobe, the special teams coach coordinator for all those years that Devin was running back punts and kickoffs and putting himself in contention to be a Hall of Famer, he was the coach at Halas Hall for the Bears. He's in Arizona. Devin Hester theoretically would be in Arizona when he finds out Thursday night NFL honors when they announce the class. That would be cool. What do you think the chances are this year Devin Hester gets in?
You know what would be the coolest about it is that it'd be the class of 23, right? So you'd have that symbolic. You could do all sorts of cool graphics. Class of 23, have the jersey out there, and it'd be just really fun for Devin. Look, like I've been firm with this since the day he became eligible. The dude's a Hall of Famer. If you not only experienced that experience and just watching him play and understanding how he impacted games, all you have to do is talk to anyone who played on a coverage or on a return unit with him, or anyone who played on a coverage unit that tried to stop him, or coaches that coached him or against him. And you understand how much there is within Devin Hester that is respected and revered as once in a lifetime and generational. And I get it. He's a specialist, and there's going to be some resistance on how do we put specialists in. Devin deserves in. I don't know if he's going to get in, David, because this is having sat on the Hall of Fame committee 10 years ago. I understand that the process is a little bit more complicated than most outsiders realize, and you only take yes or no votes on 5 guys. Okay, so 100% of the room could be ready to vote yes for Devin, but if he doesn't crack that top 5 list of this year's 15, then all of a sudden you don't even get to that yes or no vote. And so it's complicated. I think this year there's a consensus that Joe Thomas and Jarrell Revis, first-year eligible guys, are going to get in. They're going to be first ballot guys. And so now we've taken a five spots in musical chairs, and we've stuck 2 bodies on them, And so now you've got 13 guys running around 13 guys running around for 3 more spots. It gets complicated really quick, and a lot of really good football players get rejected and denied and left behind until their day ultimately comes. But I certainly, class of 23, I rubber stamp Devin in a heartbeat.
It's a good point, and it'd be a great thing to react to, and that's what we'll do next time on our next pod. We will react to the Devin Hester news. We will get Dan's long-awaited Super Bowl prediction, and I'll make mine as well. And we'll talk about the big game and any other Bears news that may happen throughout the week. Anything else that we forgot, Dan?
Man, no. I mean, we're humming along right now. I think we touched on about a dozen topics here on a random February podcast here. So we know we're full steam ahead. We're on the express ramp to getting towards free agency and the draft. I mean, this is the year right now to be talking Chicago Bears football.
We had all this stuff to get to. We didn't even mock any mock drafts. So
no, right? Like you got to get back into your mock draft mocks.
That's right. All right, great stuff. You can get the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on the 670 Scores YouTube page or the Odyssey YouTube page. Thank you for joining us today on the Take the North pod. We will talk to you next time. For Dan Wiederer, I am David Haugh from 670 The Score. Thanks for listening.
Great talk. See you out there.